Hello YouTube, and welcome to another new Elder Scrolls video. This time we will talk about another hypothetical scenario. What if the Thalmor win, and the future of Tamriel following it? This was a much requested subject after the video on Skyrim's future after a Stormcloak victory, so I guess I will give my thoughts. One final thing, I have been asked about my plans to remake the Akavir video and why it's still not out. Well, that's because at this moment it's not my highest priority, since it's remade content rather than new content. I work on it when I have some spare time, and that unfortunately hasn't happened much the last few weeks. Because the vote on whether I should remake some old content was, well, it was decided that yes, I should, but there were also a lot of people against it who were worried that I would lose too much focus on new content, so rather I remake content whenever I have time for it and have my focus remain on new content. So with that said, let's dive right into the video of today. So, first of all, this video is not my vision of what I think will happen in the Elder Scrolls 6. To me, a Thalmor victory is only one of the many possibilities for this setup, but it's a genuine possibility that they win, so let's speculate a bit. Now, before we can call a Thalmor victory, let's define the word victory, and let's get some boundaries for this video. My most general definition of victory in this sense is that the Thalmor must gain a significant amount of strategic advantage over whatever party they will be fighting, and then receive the decisive political dominance on Tamriel without a force presence strong enough to oppose them. Now, this is a pretty broad definition, but I think it's pretty workable. Now, for this video I will talk about two short scenarios, the first one being a strategic Thalmor victory, in which the war would be ended with a negotiated treaty, and the second one being a decisive victory in which the opposing force is forced to surrender and has terms dictated on them rather than being there at the negotiations. Now, before we can begin concrete speculation, we need to agree on the goals of the Thalmor. I know that there is mythical speculation on their goals. Some say that they wish to unmake the world or something in that sense. But considering their actions in the past and in the present in Skyrim, I would not deem that goal very likely, considering all the evidence we have. Rather, I think their goal is to recreate the Meretic era, a goal of which is literally stated in the Elder Scrolls canon novels that is their goal. Recreating the Meretic era would in sense mean restoring Elvish dominance to Tamriel, which falls nicely within our definition of victory, because in our definition of victory they would get the complete political dominance over Tamriel, and since the Dominion is Elvish, it would restore the Meretic era if they have complete dominance over Tamriel, depending on your definition of Meretic era. Now, when the Thalmor would engage in a second great conflict on Tamriel, this conflict would not be a matter of Dominion versus Empire. I think that rather a conflict of Dominion versus humankind would be more likely. Hammerfell, the Empire, and possibly independent Skyrim, depending on what the outcome of the Civil War is, would see themselves forced to work together, no matter what the mutual relations between them are. Because they will find common ground, as they have a common enemy in the Dominion, which does not take kindly to humans in any form. And then there's one final assumption which we will make for this speculation. For this speculation we will assume that the Dominion will use the same plan of attack as they used in the First Great War. Now, I don't think it's likely that they will use it again, but for the speculation this is the only basis of assumption that we have, as it's the only time we have seen Dominion strategy, and thus it's the only thing that we can base any future speculations on, because if I would use a speculation all of my own, that would make my ultimate speculation that I do with this video less likely to be accurate, as I would be working upon a theory rather than established history. So for now we'll just assume that, at least in the broad sense, they'll use the same attack plan. So let's assume that the human states of Tamriel decide to work together. Then I am fairly convinced that they could manage at least a fight to the Dominion with an equal power basis. It is therefore pretty fair to assume that if the human states all work together nicely, there would be no absolute decisive victory by the Dominion. Rather, if the Dominion was to win this war, I think a negotiated peace after a lot of hardship would be a good assumption. Now, For this scenario, the Dominion plan for the First Great War was repeated, and instead of the Empire crushing the Dominion at the Battle of the Red Ring, the Council of Generals of the Human States decides to sue for peace, instead of gamble on the uncertain chance of a Red Ring working again for a second time. At this point, the Human States have plenty of soldiers left, but the Dominion is also deep enough inside human territory for the situation to look very dire. At this point, if they sue for peace, they would negotiate from a weak standpoint instead of the position of strength they had after Red Ring in the first war. And you must consider that they already had a war the first time, and this is basically the revanche. So the Dominion would likely press for more serious charges after the war. Negotiations would open, and considering the fact that the Human States are not fully defeated yet, they would have a seat at the table, because they still have a position to negotiate from. Of course, the Dominion would have full dominance over the negotiations nonetheless, since they basically defeated the Human States in a strategic way, although not completely defeated. I think that in this scenario, the Dominion would demand the original coastal regions of Hammerfell that they demanded in the First Great War to remain in their possession, because they conquered it again, since they repeated the attack plan in this theory. I suspect that they would also demand a coastal corridor connecting the northern tip of Valenwood with the southern coasts of Hammerfell, giving them complete dominance over all ports in the Abyssinian Sea. In addition to that, I think they would demand a demilitarization of County Anvil and perhaps even shared sovereignty over it, or maybe claim it altogether, depending on if they want to rule the humans or just tax them. With all this, they would have a strong hand in all goings on in County Anvil, no matter what kind of claim they'll make on it. I also think that they might ask for full demilitarization of the entire southern border of the Empire. I do not think they will make any further territorial demands, because they wish to be the supreme political power, not necessarily rule all of Tamriel directly, as there are more effective ways to gain dominance by having the humans rule themselves, but then taxing them, like the Romans did. In addition to that, I suspect that they will demand full deployment and access for justiciars in all human territories. After the First Great War, they only had a mandate for them to be sent to problematic areas like Skyrim, which gave them great power in Skyrim, but not as much in other provinces, since justiciars did not have a mandate to be there. But now, after a victory, they would likely negotiate full deployment of justiciars all across the human lands to enforce the worship of Talos and make sure that treaty obligations are upheld, and of course with the underlying motive of having a hand in everything that's going on in the human land. A good example of an additional treaty obligation would be war reparations. The humans would have to pay to the Dominion a sum of money as a reparation for the war. The justiciars being deployed over all the human land would be a great asset in making sure that the money flow from the human territories would also continue. Another likely treaty obligation would be to reduce the human states' army sizes, to have a mandatory maximum amount of soldiers that the human states can have. Now, this constant draining of money and war reparations, full control over the richest trading areas being the Abyssinian Sea, deployment of your agents on a legal and open basis within the enemy territory without them being able to send them away, and the fact that the enemy has an imposed maximum amount of soldiers they can have will give you pretty much political dominance over Tamriel, rendering the human states independent-ish, but the human states would be fully paralyzed and not being able to compete with you in any way. Now, what about the scenario in a full-on decisive victory? I think that for a decisive victory to take place, the human states should be squabbling among themselves during the war, not able to coordinate their armies well, maybe even have small skirmishes among each other, instead of working together in a harmonious way against the enemy. I think if that happens, the Dominion would be able to pick the human opposition off one by one and decisively defeat their armies until most of the human armed forces are mostly gone. And then, instead of negotiate as a bloc, the human states would have to need to get separate peace treaties with the Thalmor. The favorability of a deal that they would make with the Thalmor would of course depend on the human state's involvement in the war, the strategic location of the human state, and of course the strength that's left in the human state. I think that under a decisive victory, the Empire and Hammerfell would be hit the hardest by the dictated treaty terms. Most likely the Dominion would this time claim large amounts of land, for example this land, and also perhaps they would even claim the Imperial city itself as a trophy. They might even take full control over these territories or just turn them into full puppet states. They would most likely force the Empire to dissolve itself and rather become the Kingdom of Western Cyrodiil, with them having lost the east to the Thalmor. Also forcing High Rock to become independent, with the independence process possibly overseen by Thalmor agents. The Empire would also have to revoke Orsinium, which would probably receive the same treatment as High Rock, maybe even worse considering the standing of orcs among the Thalmor. I mean, I can see them being treated more harshly than High Rock. Skyrim would probably be hit the lightest. I think for Skyrim it would only mean more justiciars and war reparations, and for the Thalmor to have any significant influence in their government. However, I think that this demand of oversight within the human governments and more Thalmor deployment would be a demand for all the human states. A Thalmor representative in all their governments would ensure that they would keep themselves to the treaty obligations and would ensure more Thalmor control over the human states. Of course, among all these additional terms, the war reparations, the limits on the armed forces, and the greater access for justiciars would also all apply to this scenario, because those would be the basics of what the Thalmor would want. And of course, the ban on Talos is also still enforced. Things like that. Anyway, I think that this is as far as we can go in speculating this, because I was requested this, but I found it quite hard to make a speculation of this. I don't know. I feel like Bethesda could go any way with this scenario, and no matter what I say, I'll probably be wrong. But people really wanted to see this for some reason, so I decided to do it. And I'm actually pretty happy with my speculation as far as I could go, but I couldn't go very far, and I was too afraid to diverge from the regular war pattern that we have seen in the First Great War. I mean, I think that depending on the war plan and depending on how the Thalmor attack, for example, if they decide to first attack the Empire only and not Hammerfell, I think that that could have a very significant impact on whether Skyrim and Hammerfell would be willing to aid the Empire. But that said, we have studied the regular Great War scenario here, so I'll keep to that for now. Anyway, if you liked it, like, subscribe. If you didn't, don't. If you want to contact me personally, there's my Discord and Instagram in the description. Also, if you want to support me in a more personal way, there is of course my Patreon, and then you get your name at the end of every video. And some minor bonuses at the end. Yeah, and I think that was it for today, and I'll see you all later this week in my next video. Bye bye.